Good morning. It's an incredible honor to receive this award. I'm sorry I'm not there in person as I'm too ill to travel. As I'm from the city of Gerald R. Ford, it's particularly poignant to receive an award honoring the legacy of Betty Ford. In the spirit of Betty Ford's courageous sharing of her ongoing struggles with alcohol use disorder, I want to begin not with my CV, but with my why. As many of you already know, addiction is deeply personal to me, as my brother died of complications of a substance use disorder when I was early in my career. And in Michigan at that time, Medicaid didn't cover physician care for addiction. That policy barrier wasn't abstract to me. It was a wall that kept him and so many others from treatment that could have saved his and their lives. His death broke my heart, but it also clarified my path. It showed me that addiction isn't about an individual illness. His death wasn't because I hadn't done enough or because he didn't want a different life. Addiction is about systems that either support people or shut them out. So let me ask you, what systems are we a part of? What systems are we shaping? Since then, my work has been about changing those systems through education, through advocacy, and through building communities that believe in recovery and act on that belief. Education, because every learner we reach is one more ripple against stigma. And advocacy, because every story we share is one more current pushing the system forward. My hope is that we harness this momentum, these ripples and currents, to advance addiction science and treatment, and to ensure every community has access to care rooted in dignity, evidence, and hope. That is what I want to share with you this morning. How education and advocacy are not extras in addiction medicine. They are the heart of the work. They are how we honor the people who have died and how we equip the people we train and how we sustain hope in a time when uncertainty feels like the only constant. Because here's the truth. The future of addiction care will not be secured by waiting for perfect policies or for stable funding or for someone else to fix the system. The future of addiction care is being built by us together. And in this room, I know the very people who are already doing it are sitting there today. Take a moment and look around. You are the builders. You are the change makers. Each of you here today has the capacity, drive, and talent to change the systems. We can harness each other, harness the memories of those who have died, harness the joy of those in recovery, and create the change and the future that addiction medicine deserves. We can harness that wind, fill our sails, and change the world. When I talk about education, I don't just mean the transfer of knowledge or skills. I mean culture change. We know that people with substance use disorders are some of the most stigmatized patients in healthcare. And that stigma doesn't just live in attitudes. It shows up in outcomes. It shows up when a patient is denied pain medication because they're drug seeking. It shows up when a pharmacy refuses to fill a prescription because it looks suspicious. It shows up when a clinician quietly decides this isn't the kind of patient I want on my panel. And here's the thing, we can all push back against this in very practical ways. Take that phrase drug seeking. I encourage people to reframe it as relief seeking. The real question isn't whether someone is drug seeking, it's what are they seeking relief from? Are they in withdrawal? Are they in pain? Are they carrying the weight of social barriers? That one shift in language forces us to see the patient's humanity, and it changes the clinical encounter. Or think about the pharmacy. If I know I'm sending a prescription that might raise concerns, maybe a high-dose buprenorphine script I'm using in someone who's struggling with opioids, I'll pick up the phone and call. A 2-minute conversation explaining the plan can turn what would have been a rejection into a collaboration. These aren't sweeping educational mandates, but they are everyday acts of training. They are ripples that over time shift the culture of medicine. Stigma shouldn't determine who gets care and who doesn't. And yet every day it still does. That's why our work matters so deeply. We will continue to do the work, meeting our colleagues where they are, until they reach a point where stigma no longer drives care, until we get to a point where kindness and compassion drive care, where people don't have to be worried about how they're going to be treated when they enter the healthcare system with an active substance use disorder. One where people in long-term recovery feel safe telling their healthcare teams that they are in long-term recovery because it is applauded, because they are cheered for their strength and resilience. Let me ask you a question. How many of you had more than a lecture or two on addiction during your training? Too many of us didn't. And when you think about it, why would the system be free of stigma when we never gave people the education to replace fear with competence or judgment with compassion? That's why education matters. Because if we want to change outcomes, we have to change culture. Every time we teach differently, we drop another pebble in the water, and those ripples eventually reshape the shore. My Cares is my addiction education program, and it has become the largest of its kind in the country. It began as a simple idea from a meeting at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services in 2018 regarding how we train medical students on prescribing opioids. The idea was simple, that every health professional should be trained to treat addiction with skill and compassion. It has now reached tens of thousands of learners, physicians, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, social workers, medical students, residents, and more. The heart of My Cares is simple. Education should not be a barrier. We make training accessible, evidence-based, and stigma-free. And the result, a workforce that sees addiction differently and cares for patients differently. When we first started in Michigan, My Care's goal was modest, to ensure that each of the 6 other medical schools had at least one addiction medicine physician on faculty, so students would have someone who could teach them. That was it. We wanted 6 doctors in 6 schools. But like most things in addiction medicine, the deeper we went, the more we realized the need was much bigger. That small goal grew into something far more expansive. Now 6 of the 7 medical schools in Michigan include My Care's didactics and electives in their curriculum. And we didn't stop at medicine. The work extended into other prescribing sciences and social work because addiction care isn't the responsibility of just one profession. Our little pebble has reshaped education in meaningful ways. What began with a handful of faculty has rippled outward into an interprofessional movement. And today, those ripples extend across the country. My Cares has reached more than 20,000 learners nationwide. That's 20,000 people who now have better tools, less fear, and more confidence to care for patients with substance use disorders. To give you a sense of scale, in the last 2 years, a third of all physicians who became ABPM boarded in addiction medicine came through My Cares. None of us predicted that when we started. We thought we were building a rowboat. It turns out we needed a cruise ship. But what I'm most proud of isn't the number. It's who these learners are. Medical students, residents, practicing clinicians, physicians' assistants, nurses, social workers, recovery coaches, pharmacists, every corner of the care team. Because addiction care doesn't belong to one discipline. It's everybody's job. And people are hungry for this. They want to learn. They want the tools. But even more than that, they want permission to care. Imagine what it means for a patient to walk into a clinic and be met by someone who sees them not as a problem, but as a person. That's the ripple effect. At the beginning of this academic year, I had my first round of family medicine clerkship students visit for their half-day addiction medicine clinical experience. I had 2 students that afternoon. The first one I knew. He'd been interested in addiction and took the My Cares early elective. Easy. He bought in before crossing the threshold. The second one, well, she arrived late, arms crossed, telling me she wanted to be a surgeon and didn't see the point of being there. 4 hours later, and we were debriefing when she said, "When am I coming back, Dr. Bullen? I thought this was going to be really different. These patients aren't scary at all. Everyone needs to do that." That moment wasn't just about learning the right facts or memorizing the right guidelines. That was something bigger. That was a culture shift. That was another ripple. That was stigma being replaced by confidence and compassion. That shift from resistance to curiosity is what education can do. It's not just about knowledge. It's about transformation. We can transform our learners and their experience. One person at a time multiplies into thousands of patients over a career. And I've heard similar stories from other professions. A pharmacist recently thanked me for calling and coordinating care on a complex benzodiazepine taper, saying that seems reasonable. I'll make sure to also speak to the patient. In fact, I can color code the bottles to make it a bit easier. Have you thought about blister packs to help with keeping track during a taper? A nurse on the postpartum unit at the hospital shared that she started correcting colleagues when they said addict instead of person with substance use disorder. What surprised her was that her colleagues actually listened. Those aren't just individual feel-good stories. These aren't isolated moments. They're signals that the culture is changing, that change is contagious. They're the evidence that culture change is possible, evidence that ripples turn into waves because addiction education multiplied. One resident becomes an attending who teaches dozens more. One nurse can change the way an entire hospital unit treats patients. One social worker can transform the way a whole clinic engages with families. And those shifts ripple outward into patients' lives. And this cultural shift isn't limited to clinical care. Researchers, too, are part of this transformation. When we train researchers to use person-first language to center lived experience and to challenge structural stigma in their study design, we're not just improving science, we're shaping the very questions we ask and the impact we aim for. Research becomes another ripple. Think about your own training. Who taught you to care for people with substance use disorder? What messages did you receive? And which ones do you want to rewrite? Every learner we reach is one more ripple against stigma. And when you add up those ripples, you start to see waves, maybe one day creating a tsunami. Now I want to pause here and acknowledge the moment we're in. These are uncertain times. Federal funding streams feel fragile. Policies shift, agencies change leadership. It can feel as though the ground is shifting beneath our feet. But education is something we can always grow. Nobody can take away what we've already taught. And once a learner sees addiction as a treatable illness, once they see recovery with their own eyes, they don't go back. That's permanent. That's hope embodied in the workforce. That's why I say education is culture change, because if we teach differently, we will care differently. And if we care differently, we will change the system. And like water, those changes don't stay contained. They flow outward into clinics, into policies, and into communities. They reshape the system. If education is how we change culture, advocacy is how we change systems. And I want to start with something simple but important. Advocacy is not lobbying. Lobbying is about influencing a specific bill or vote. Advocacy is broader. It's speaking up for patients. It's calling out barriers. It's bringing our expertise and our humanity into spaces where decisions are being made. For too long, advocacy has been treated as optional, as extra. But let's be clear, advocacy is part of clinical care. Because when the systems around our patients are broken, silence is not neutral. Silence is complicity. Silence lets the current sweep them away. For me, advocacy grew directly out of my way. When my brother Max died, I promised myself his life would still matter if I could keep telling his story, if I could use my voice to change the system that failed him. There's a line that I went back to again and again from Sunita Sharma. When you lose someone, the world still turns, the stars still shine, and the wheels of time move on. But somewhere deep within your soul, a small part of you dies. That's what it felt like, what it still feels like. And every time I spoke to a legislator, to a colleague, to anyone who would listen, it was like sending ripples into dark water, waiting for the shimmer of light to finally break the surface. And when it did, it showed me that change was possible. One of my biggest wins was what came to be called the Poland policy. This was the culmination of 7 years. Let me say that again, 7 years of advocacy. When I first returned to Michigan in 2013, Medicaid in Michigan excluded seeing a prescriber as a covered benefit for persons with substance use disorders. Not just certain services, the diagnosis itself. If you had a substance use disorder, it wasn't covered. That's not just a policy problem. That's cruelty. So I started knocking on doors. I built partnerships with clinicians, advocates, and policymakers. I told Max the story, my story, and I backed it up with data. And eventually that policy changed. Medicaid began covering opioid use disorder and alcohol use disorder. It felt like pressing against a dam. In small but certain ways, the cracks were widening, light was filtering through, and waters were shifting. Advocacy broke open into possibility. And that policy didn't change because I had the right credentials. That policy changed because I had the right story, because I kept telling my story every chance I had, because Max's life and the lives of so many others didn't have to end early, and they certainly weren't going to end in vain. I couldn't stay quiet because all of the other families suffering like mine deserve differently. If I could prevent one other sister, brother, mother, uncle, grandparent, or cousin from feeling that gaping hole in their family, then I needed to keep talking. It took a few more years and more than a few dead ends, but we got there. And once that dam was open, the floodgates propelled us in multiple directions. I remember one legislator who said, "I never thought about addiction this way until I heard about Max." That moment mattered more than I can put into words. By 2024, the Poland policy expanded to all substance use disorder diagnoses. Medicaid HMOs began covering inpatient addiction consults. We developed billing processes for recovery coaches who serve as community health workers. The dam was broken. None of these wins happened quickly. None of them happened alone. And honestly, none of them happened without frustration. Advocacy is slow. It's messy. It's sometimes holding your breath and screaming underwater. But it's also the only way systems change. And when systems change, patients' lives change. Here's what I've learned from these experiences. First, advocacy starts with purpose. You don't advocate because it's fun or easy. You advocate because something keeps you up at night and you can't not speak about it. Second, advocacy requires persistence. Policies don't change because we said the right thing once. They change because we keep showing up, even when it feels like pushing against a relentless current. Third, advocacy is most powerful when we blend data with stories. Policymakers need evidence, but they also need to be reminded why it matters. Max's story has opened up conversations that data alone could never have. Finally, advocacy is for everyone. It doesn't have to be a Senate committee or a federal policy. Advocacy can happen in your clinic, in your department, and in your community. You don't need a title to make change happen. You need a voice, and you already have one. Every action matters. It's a pebble in the lake. Every action moves the system a little closer to justice. That's why I say advocacy is systems change. Because when we choose to speak up, we connect individual pain to collective action. We take what we see in our professional experience and turn it into something bigger. We turn it into something that reshapes what's possible for patients we'll never even meet. And in times of uncertainty, when funding is fragile, when block grants are debated, when NIH and SAMHSA shift priorities, advocacy is what steadies us. It gives us purpose. It multiplies our voices. It keeps us from feeling powerless. Education multiplies. Advocacy multiplies. Both ripple outward in ways we can't always see. But together, they are how we change systems, honors those who have died, and keep hope alive. We've covered a lot, but this isn't just a talk. It's my call to action for each of you. So where does that leave us? I've shared with you this morning 2 themes that have defined my career. Education is culture change, and advocacy is systems change. Education equips us to see patients differently, and when we see them differently, we treat them differently. Every learner is a ripple against stigma, and when you add up enough ripples, you get waves. Advocacy takes those waves and turns them into systems change. It connects our exam rooms to policy rooms, our patient stories to legislative agendas. Advocacy is how we honor the people who have died by making sure the system doesn't continue to fail others. And I know these are uncertain times. We feel it in every news story, every policy debate, and every budget cycle. But I don't want us to leave here discouraged, because if there's one thing addiction medicine has taught me, It's this: hope is not naive. Hope is strategy. Hope is training the next learner who will carry the work forward. Hope is sitting in the state capitol telling a legislator a patient story until they can't ignore it anymore. Hope is knowing that even when systems feel immovable, we are moving them. Hope is not passive, it's active, it's deliberate. It's how we survive and how we lead. And here's the truth: we don't have to wait for perfect policies or stable funding or someone else to fix the system. The future of addiction care is being built today, right now, in this room. It's being built by us together. We build it in classrooms, in clinics, in legislative hearings, in community meetings. We build it every time we push against stigma, every time we demand evidence-based care, every time we remind the world that people with substance use disorders deserve dignity and recovery. So my message to you is simple: don't underestimate the power of your own ripple, because your ripple will join with others, and together we are making waves. Together we are changing the shoreline. What's the ripple you can start this month? Is it one conversation? Is it one training? Or is it one story shared? Each small pebble dropped in the water matters. And looking out at this room, I know there's a room filled with people who are already teaching, already advocating, and already building. I feel certain of this: the future of addiction medicine is hopeful. It's in good hands. It's in your hands. And finally, I end with a message to my family. To my brother Max, whose life continues to guide mine: you are the deep current beneath everything I do. This work is for you. To my children, who remind me every day why hope is not naive, but necessary: you are the light that dances on the surface, showing me the way forward. And to my husband, who stayed home with our kids for almost a decade while supporting my career: you are the steady breeze in my sail, keeping me afloat and moving toward the horizon. I love you all more than words can say. Thank you.